How do you find your voice when you're the youngest person in the room, full of senior executives from private equity firms in Africa? Apparently, you spend your evenings researching on YouTube. Welcome to Busting Roadblocks, the podcast where we break down the biggest roadblocks in business and help you clear a path to success. I'm Janet Charters, your host and the founder of JC Consultancy, where we help businesses remove barriers and unlock their full potential. Today, we're chatting with Amy Smith, business coach, speaker, and LinkedIn marketing specialist. I met Amy through a business consulting course. I say met, but we've only ever had online interactions, as is this one. Well, that's how business is done these days, isn't it, Amy? Welcome.
Definitely. Thanks so much for having me, Janet.
Now, I know your work history spans Canada, the UK, Australia, are working across HR, business development, and the coaching space. And although we could spend days talking about all the roadblocks you've come in contact with, we have a specific roadblock that we're going to discuss today from your recruitment days in London. Now, obviously, we won't go into specific names. However, can you set the scene? Who are we dealing with?
Yeah, so like you said, there's so many different roadblocks I've come across in my career. I'm never one to shy away from a challenge, so I've always kind of liked a challenge in my career. But I think one of the biggest things was when I was first starting out and I had just left university and grew up in Sydney, went to University of Sydney, and thought to myself, why not just head overseas to London to start my career? And
Sure.
so I got
Other
my
side of the world.
Exactly, exactly. Why not make it easy on yourself? Just choose a really hard thing to do. So, got my working holiday visa, ended up landing a job in London before I even got on the plane. So, I had hustled my way to
Wow.
get a job.
Yeah.
It was for this executive recruitment firm, and my role was actually to develop the whole executive recruitment wing of the business. It was a new function for the business,
Mhm.
and it was actually within quite a particular niche. So it was in the private equity space
Okay.
of firms that had an interest in Africa.
Wow.
And so for me, I'm this like Aussie girl straight out of uni, headed on the plane over to London. And now I'm responsible for setting up this executive recruitment wing of the business. And so I entered into a role where I did not have any experience in the industry, in private equity particularly. I had like tiny little bit of recruitment experience just from a quick contract when I was at uni. And that was about it. I was in a new country, new culture, turning up with my Aussie accent and I'm just ready to see how it went.
Yeah, so fresh out of uni to go to the other side of the world to take your first real job is, yeah, that's not shying away from any kind of challenges for sure. But you're also really young and female in
Mm,
a business where you're going to go after all of these really type A personalities, right? You're going after CEOs and senior executives and private equity. I mean, that's known for
mhm.
really um, how would I say it? Passionate, strong-willed individuals.
That's a good way to put it.
How did you find that?
Yeah, so it was challenging. Like I said, I'm not going to shy away from a challenge. And so I did find myself in situations where, I was headhunting CEOs and executives that were 20 years, 30 years, 40 years my senior, and picking up the phone and hoping that they wouldn't think it was a prank call
Yeah,
because of my Aussie accent.
yeah.
And it was, yeah, it was really interesting. I was also working within that firm. It was quite a high performance culture as well. One of the things that I found really interesting, and I've never had this at any other firm that I've worked at, but they actually had a lady that would come around and ask you if you wanted a tea or coffee at your
Oh,
desk so that you didn't leave your desk to go to the kitchen to make your own tea or coffee. That's how intense it
it was
was.
a
And so
waste of time. Wow.
yeah, exactly, exactly, to increase productivity. So that's the environment I was in. And yeah, it was a huge roadblock in the beginning because I did not have the experience. I was just completely a fish out of water. And I really had to find my feet very quickly.
Yeah. So you're this young, new, fresh off the boat, had no real work experience with all of these type A personalities. So you must have found it really difficult to find your voice and find how you were going to find your place in this. I mean, and particularly in these boardrooms with people talking to very strong people, right? Really strong personalities, and maybe a
Mhm.
little bit of imposter syndrome.
Yeah, look, there was definitely an intimidation factor for sure. Like you said, I was, young and female, like the exact opposite of everyone I was dealing with for the most part. So I think I got used to kind of the judgment as well of entering rooms where I was taken at face value. And it was actually really quite funny when I turned up for a meeting one time and I was just heading up to the top of the stairs and there was some, let's say, older gentlemen that were at the top of the stairs there. And one of them looked at me and he just said, "Oh, the ladies are down on the left." And I just said, "Thank you." But I was not looking for the bathroom. I was actually heading to the same meeting. And so he kind of had this sheepish look on his face when he realized that I was there just for the meeting. I wasn't this lost person in the middle of, of this hotel. So, yeah, it was kind of interesting. I think I look at imposter syndrome maybe a little bit differently in that I always think that it just means that you're on that edge of that next level of growth. So I actually look at imposter syndrome as a bit of a signal just to get better.
Yeah.
And I did feel a lot of that, but it was more of a fuel, like for me. And that might seem a little bit weird or strange, but it was just
Okay.
a fuel for me to go, okay, this is a challenge, like take it on and get better.
Yeah.
And so I did have to do extra work than other people in terms of the amount of learning that I needed to do and the speed at which I had to pick things up. And then I did a lot of observation as well of people around me and I guess kind of find my lane, if you like, in terms of some of the advantages that I had of being young and being a little bit naive was that I think there were some people that were wanting to mentor me and were wanting to help me and could see that I was hungry and could see that I wanted to grow and were willing to lean into that a little bit as well. And so I tried to use that to my advantage where I could, in that I could use that sort of young naivety to ask silly questions and just to make sure that I was keeping up,
Yeah.
essentially.
So when you're saying extra prep and extra learning, can you expand on that a little bit? Because, that's really broad. You're in this room with, you've said African, private equity, senior execs. So we've got it's a pretty tight group, right? You can't just talk about what's happening in the UK politics. It's not relevant to these guys. So tell us about this extra learning.
Totally. So, yeah, there was a couple of things. I knew I couldn't compete on the experience in the room. I didn't come from this wealth of corporate experience or private equity experience or anything like that. But I knew I needed to be able to hold a conversation. I needed to understand what are the topics of interest to these people so that I could actually hold a conversation at networking events or I could get taken seriously in a room.
Yeah.
So, this is going to reveal my kind of nerd instincts here, Janet, but I did spend a lot of nights after work where I would be watching YouTube and I'd be watching BBC reruns of like private equity market breakdowns and in researching different investment portfolios and looking at all of these different things that I knew were within the world of the people I was operating with. And so at least I had an understanding, or at least I could go into that room and I could feel some level of confidence, or
Yeah.
at least not feel stupid or not say the wrong things. And so that was kind of one aspect to it. And then the other aspect was really thinking about, well, if I can't compete on the experience side of things, like where's the value that I can really bring? What can I really lean into
Yeah.
that is going to be helpful for these people? And for me, that was LinkedIn. And
Yeah. Great.
so I was using that as a tool already in the business, and so were a lot of the other people within the business, but not to the extent that I knew was possible. And so I really went down this rabbit hole of LinkedIn and I really upskilled myself in that area so that that became a real value add. And that actually became a conversation starter for a
Great.
lot of the people that I was working with around helping them with their profiles and all sorts of things. And so I found my lane where I could really add value.
Yeah. So your nerdiness, or I think it just plays back to what you said before, you're really hungry and you
Yeah.
weren't just faking it in the 8 hours at your work. You really wanted to do well at this job. So you went and did all this extra prep and all extra time. You knew your lane and you kind of worked that, right? Like you said, you talked to the group and asked for advice. And particularly men who are 20 to 30 years older than you do really like to share advice. They like to feel like someone cares about how they got where they did and the experience that they can pass on. And then you brought your
Mhm.
value through utilizing, I guess back then would have been quite modern tools like LinkedIn to
Yeah.
update your
Yeah.
profile, etc.
Mhm.
So even though back then you wouldn't have realized that you were breaking down all of these roadblocks and using
Yeah.
what we would probably call things now the nuances of emotional intelligence and consistency of execution, because we can give them management terms, but you were 20 something just going, how am I going to get ahead? You added value not only to yourself, because obviously we can see the coach you are today, that's a direct result of that first role being so I mean, they didn't even let you go have a cup of tea. This is
They
madness.
didn't.
But that's turned you into you, right? And then
Yeah.
but to the business, because now we can chuck you anywhere. And you could
Mhm.
sit with the Prime Minister and you'd be able to hold your own, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, funny you say that. There were some parliament meetings. We did have meetings with prime ministers
Wow.
throughout my time through.
It's different
But
exec.
yeah. But you're right. I think, it taught me, I think, at a really early age, just to back myself, and then just to, trust that I would be able to figure it out. Like, you don't have to go in with all the answers. I didn't have all the confidence in the world, and I still don't. It's just always a work in progress to know that, okay, if there's a gap, if there's something that you can do, then you've just got to figure it out.
Yeah.
And so that sort of taught me that approach from an early age. And so I did get really comfortable, I think, being in uncomfortable spaces.
Yeah.
And being in uncomfortable spots, I guess, in my own growth journey or pushing myself off the edge, I think, for a lot of people who just tend to want to stay a little bit safer. And so that taught me a little bit more about taking some calculated risks in my career and being in those rooms, and ended up working in lots of different spaces where I was continually the youngest female in a boardroom situation or a peer advisory setting, where I was working with CEOs and business owners of $100 million companies and helping them to grow their personal brands and helping them to really start to build their own businesses and use LinkedIn. And so that's kind of where that took me. And one of my favorite quotes from Steve Jobs is that you can't really look forward and connect the dots. You can only look backwards and
Absolutely.
connect the dots from there. So it was all kind of building blocks for what I do now, but I didn't necessarily know that at the time. I was just trying not to get fired.
Yeah, but now you have all these tools in your repertoire. So when you
Yeah.
come up against yet another, because I have this feeling that this your hunger and your need for challenges is not stopped yet. Hopefully you
Mhm.
don't jump off and go to the other side of the world again. However, who knows? So it's led you to be who you are today. And now you have the tools, you can actually pull them more regularly because you're like, actually, no, I need a bit more emotional intelligence for this situation because this is what I'm dealing with. And I need
Mm.
to figure out what my lane is. And I need to do a little bit more prep because I want to not feel like an idiot. I don't want to be the smartest person in the room, but I don't want to feel like an idiot in this room. I want to be able to hold my own. So this
Yeah.
is also and like an awesome real life example for people to see, even though you may not even know you're doing it, you are breaking down those roadblocks that are right in front of you. And
Mm.
some people just don't do that. They just look at it and go, poor me, this is too hard. I'm going to go find another job, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
character
Exactly.
building.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thank you for
Definitely.
sharing that example with our audience. Now, how can our audience get hold of you in your role now? Tell us all about you.
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. AmyLSmith.com is also my website. So you'll find me on LinkedIn under Amy Smith. I work with a lot of coaches, consultants, corporate trainers, and professional services providers to help them grow their businesses, primarily using LinkedIn. And so it has been that common theme that I've used throughout my career, but doing it in a different way now, which I really love, helping people to overcome their own roadblocks when it comes to growing their business.
Absolutely. And we'll share those details in the podcast description for this episode. So thank you again, Amy. I really appreciate it. If you found this podcast valuable, make sure you subscribe and share with your network. And if you have a business challenge you'd like me to cover, reach out to me on LinkedIn or at jcconsultancy.co. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What roadblocks are you facing right now?